I mean, to me, I see I see people like Bill O'Reilly on television, right? And I see how much they control the media. Like there's this girl on Bill O'Reilly the other night from an organization saying the world can't wait. And this girl was spot on. Everything she was saying was the truth. And all Bill O'Reilly could do was call her a lunatic. He couldn't challenge the facts. They just call people names. They can't, and until we just find that, look, this world, we're heading into a world of danger, possible nuclear wars, because the banking industry is trying to take over the world. 9/11 is the beginning of the war on terror. That war on terror is leading us into Iraq, which is the next lie. So you had the lie of 9/11, how that happened. Nobody knows how Building 7 came down. Okay, we know 9/11 was a fraud. The American people don't know it, but more and more of them are believing it. Okay, so that was the first lie. Besides the inception, I'm not going back to the inception of the Federal Reserve, that original lie. But 9/11 was the first lie in this present state we're in. 9/11 is the kickoff of the war against the American people and the people of the world. 9/11 was a phony. It's a fraud. It didn't happen the way they told us it happened. Now, because of 9/11, we then had the authority to go into Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Okay? So that was the next lie. Now they're talking about going into Iran. Now, how would you feel if you were Iran and you had this big, powerful country, America, go into your next door neighbor, take over their oil fields, right? Wouldn't you be worried that what they were going to do to you? Of course you're going to be worried. But the people of America don't think about it from Iran's point of view. They think about it from our point of view. So now we're going to send more troops into Iraq and keep building up because they want Iraq and the Middle East to become part of the New World Order. And Iraq was using, Saddam wanted to start using euros instead of dollars, right?
He was messing up their whole consumption.
Iran wants to start using euros instead of dollars.
They have.
Okay? So I'm saying what they're trying to do is preserve their power. And one lie leads to the next lie, leads to the next lie. And until you get to the root cause of 9/11, which is supposedly the war on terror, we'll never solve our problems here. Should we send more troops into Iraq? Should we not send more troops into Iraq? Well, the fact is, that it all goes back to this war on terror. Where did 9/11 come from? That's the root cause of everything. And until we have a full investigation, find out why Building 7 fell down, why they shipped all the steel out of America so quickly, from the buildings, why all the things that don't make any sense about 9/11, until we find out why it really happened, we'll never understand why there's a war on terror. And we'll never be able to prove that the war on terror is a phony. Nick and I discussed many things. One of the things we discussed, or he brought up in conversation, was reducing world population, and felt that there were too many people in the world. In a way, I agree. There are too many people in the world, but I don't think I have the authority to say who's going to die and who's not going to die, But they felt that they wanted to reduce world population, and he felt that it should be reduced by half. He even mentioned to me once they were having a real problem trying to solve the Israel-Palestinian problem. And he talked to me once about they were playing with the idea of bringing Israel to Arizona, and taking all the people from Israel and giving everybody $1 million and setting up Israel in the state of Arizona.
Unbelievable.
To end that problem, because that's a problem that they're not in charge of, in a sense. They're not controlling that problem. They're very arrogant. They can do whatever they want to do. We've given these people the authority to create money out of thin air, and through that device, they control everything. And if you want to win the battle to stop that, you have to deny them the ability to create money. It's only because they can make money that they have all this power.
They literally have the money machines.
They have the money machines. They can print it. They can do whatever they want to do. They own everything.
Aaron, we'd take over pretty quick if we were the guys that issued the money. Everybody had to come give us real assets for the use of this money we just printed up.
People. I tell people, why in the world does the American government borrow money from the banks when they have the ability to create it themselves without borrowing it and paying interest on it? Why? And nobody can answer that question. Not one politician ever raises that. Why does the American government borrow money when they can create it without paying interest?
Well, we did create it up until 1913.
And so people say, well, because if the American government does it, it'll create inflation. That's the answer. I say, well, let's look at it. The American government has the Federal Reserve do it, which creates the same inflation as if they did it. But also with the inflation, now you're getting massive debt. So with the Federal Reserve, you have inflation and debt. Now, if the American government made the money, backed by gold, which limited the amount they could make, you wouldn't have debt and you wouldn't have inflation.
But inflation was only about 50% from the 1780s, I've looked it up, until the late 1800s. And then we have the central banks already trying to cause some panics, which they then used to push the Federal Reserve. And if we look at inflation since 1913 into 2007, it's exponential. In fact, a dollar is worth about 2 pennies what it was worth in 1913. Former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan doubled the money supply from 2000 to 2006. And then Edward Bernanke, the new Fed chief, came in and said he was going to double it again in the next 2 years. And then he said, now I'm going to make the money supply numbers secret. And so now we don't even know.
Right.
But the evidence is they are just, in the curve of inflation, it gradually grows. And then suddenly at a point, it goes straight up. And it seems
it's parabolic, yeah.
Yeah, parabolic.
But the thing is that the only thing I disagree with you on from early 1800 to 1913, there was no inflation other than during the Civil War. When Lincoln was
Well, I'm
printing
talking about how much a dollar was worth. And I know
it never changed. There was no inflation. In that whole 100 years, there was no inflation. People knew what the money was worth. They could retire. They knew what it would cost them to live their lives out. There was no problem. It was only since 1913 when the Fed came in that we created massive inflation and massive debt.
So then what you said earlier, then there really wasn't inflation.
There was no inflation.
So you don't get inflation when the government issues the money, at least in the U.S. history.
Well, not if it's backed by gold.
Well, exactly. But I'm talking about, and I did look this up, and I believe that if you look after the country was set up, and some of the things happened with Andrew Jackson and the rest of it, there were points where it spiked and there were manipulations.
There were points, mostly during the Civil War.
Yeah. And that's because Lincoln printed so much money.
Exactly. That's right. But once that ended, but basically there was no inflation other than that during that short period of time. I mean, a loaf of bread was a loaf. Of course, the same thing. People could plan their lives. Today, they planned inflation. Now you have two parents working. They can't afford to pay for their family anymore. The kids are going to state-run schools now. The kids are being indoctrinated how to think. They're being given Ritalin. They're being given all these drugs. The whole country's being dumbed down. It's all because of the Federal Reserve System. And the Federal Reserve System and these bankers are responsible for the demise of America. And if we ever want to win this battle, you must shut down the Federal Reserve System. And we must shut down these bankers and restore sound money to this country.
Will you talk a little bit about some of the families that own the private Federal Reserve, the stock in it? And I mean, obviously, you say you're not a big expert on Bilderberg Group, but you talk about how it's the same system worldwide. It is the same families. They meet and kind of set the policy each year, and then it goes to the Royal Institute of International Affairs in England, it goes to the CFR in the U.S., and then these are their management bodies where they wield control, really the de facto Congresses over the nation. So, I mean, I would like to get you to speak some about the families that own and run the Federal Reserve, and if you can't connect it into these other international bodies.
Well, I can't speak to those families because I can only speak about, what I know for fact. Everything else is speculation, and I don't like to speculate. I know about Rockefeller because I was friends with him. We talked about it, and I can tell you firsthand.
What did Rockefeller tell you about the Federal Reserve and their family owning part of it?
Well, he said the New York Fed is the main controlling interest of the Federal Reserve System. They control the bulk of it. So the New York Fed is really the Federal Reserve System. Even though there's 12 different banks, it's run by the New York Fed. And the New York Fed is basically the Federal Reserve System. So who's ever running the New York Fed is where, and the families that control it control the New York Fed, and they're the main engine behind the Federal Reserve System.
And that's a wing of the Bank of England.
Well, the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve are partners, and the Bank of England is a private bank, and so is the Bundesbank in Germany, and the bank of all the banks of the G8 countries are all private banks. They're private central banks. And look, what happened in Europe? Didn't Europe vote down the European Constitution?
Yes.
They're still doing it. Didn't they vote down the euro? They're still doing it. They don't care what the people vote. They do whatever they want to do. What we want doesn't matter anymore. It's their agenda. It's their plans that matter.
Isn't that prima facie evidence of a tyranny?
Well, there's no question we're in tyranny. There's no question we're living in a world where the American citizen is no longer a free individual human being to do the things that they wish to do. We're slaves, and it's getting worse.
What do we got to do to bring these people down?
In my opinion, you must shut down the Federal Reserve System. And I think that there has to be an uprising. There has to be an uprising. People have to stand up. I can't do it alone. You can't do it alone, Alex. And we need to get a majority of people, not a majority of people, but...
It was 5% won the war against the British, a highly motivated group. But I agree, people have got to get angry first. I mean, not just, we know it's corrupt and that lackadaisical. We got to get pissed.
People don't seem to have the courage to do what they have to do,
I want to say you've got a lot of courage.
Well, thank you. I don't know if I have a lot of courage. I just have
I want to thank you for what you're doing for my family.
Well, I have a sense of conscience and I have a sense of justice. I get nervous about what I do, but I do it because there's no other choice. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do it, But the fact of the matter is, I've ostracized myself pretty much from Hollywood. People are afraid to deal with me in Hollywood a lot because of what I do and the things I say. I don't go along with routines. A lot of people in Hollywood know the truth. They're not willing to stand up and speak about it. I know many of them have seen my movie, and they know I'm right, and they won't talk about it because everybody's afraid. Everybody's afraid because they think that this money they get, these Federal Reserve notes, are really money, and they think they have a comfortable lifestyle, and they're afraid to change. They're afraid to stand up for what's right. And until people are willing to stand up and have the courage to do what they need to do, it's not going to change. And hopefully, what you're doing, what I'm doing, what other people like us are doing, can affect the change that people will stand up and say, hey, I've had enough. The thing is, we have one advantage. That they need us to cooperate. See, if we don't cooperate with them, they can't win. And so they always need our cooperation to go along with their programs.
So they try to sell us.
Right. They try to sell us. Democracy, this majority says this, believe in this, do that. The war on terror, we got to be scared. They're always trying to do things to sell us so that we'll go along with them. And once we learn not to cooperate with them, then we win the game. And that's the point. Don't cooperate with them. Don't go along with the program anymore. Stop it. Join forces. You and I should run for president and vice president and take over this country and bring freedom back to this country. That's what it takes. Two people like you and I, statesmen who believe in freedom, who believe in Thomas Jefferson and the Constitution and the founding fathers to make this country whole again. Because right now it's in the grip of the evil ones, And the only way to stop that is for good men to stand up. Was Edmund Burke said, evil can only thrive when good men do nothing?
Yes.
Right? We got to do something. That's what it is, Silence is golden, but when it comes to your freedom, it's yellow. We have to stop being scared. We have to stand up and do what's necessary to take back, to stop these bankers, these elite, this government full of lies, congressmen full of liars, People destroying our borders, creating a government. Imagine this. Here you are in America, and they're combining America, Canada, and Mexico into one country, the North American Union, and the American people don't know anything about it. It's not even in the press. They'd rather talk about Rosie O'Donnell and Donald Trump calling each other names than discussing the fact that we're merging into one country. The press doesn't even report it.
Or that Paris Hilton doesn't wear underwear.
Yeah, Britney Spears. But who cares? I mean, the fact of the matter happens to be that tells you how controlled the media is. Here you are combining America, Canada, and Mexico into one country, and you don't see it in the press.
Unless maybe it's Lou Dobbs.
You don't see it in the press. You just don't see it.
It should be the top story everywhere.
Everywhere, and not a word about it, really. Why? That tells you there's the evidence that it's controlled. They don't want the American people to know what's going on. That's why they don't protect our borders. That's why we're losing our Constitution, the very document that secures our freedoms.
There is a rising tide against it.
There is a rising tide, but we have to mobilize. We have to mobilize. And we have to get all the good people in this country to stand together and say, I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, I think if you analyze the situation, and if you realize that since the Federal Reserve has come into being in 1913, illegally, without a constitutional amendment, by bribing a few senators during Christmas vacation, they turned over the most important power that the American government has, the creation and issuance of money, to a private bank. Through that private bank issuing money, they have destroyed this country. They have destroyed the purchasing power of the money in this country. They've created social programs that are destroying this country.
Thanks to the work of Aaron Russo and Ron Paul and many others, folks are starting to find out who the real enemy is. Offshore private banking corporations that have engaged in a hostile corporate takeover of the United States and almost every other nation on the planet. And the private Federal Reserve is their beachhead here in the United States. Ron Paul has introduced H.R. 1207 that at time of taping has over 87 sponsors just to audit the private Federal Reserve that arrogantly says it's above all U.S. laws and above all three branches of government and that no law enforcement can investigate them. I mean, how asinine is that? How above the law is that? How ridiculous is that? Everybody else gets audited. Nobody else is above the law but them, this group of plutocrats, this group of polycentric bankers that are setting up this neo-feudal world system.
Now, they've taken over our government, both Republicans and Democrats. There's no difference anymore between the two parties. They control both parties. It doesn't matter to them which one wins, because who's ever running for president will be someone they anoint, okay? Whether it's Hillary Clinton or John McCain running for president next year, they're going to be people that are going to do what they want them to do. And the fact of the matter happens to be that you can't win an election unless you have enough money to win. They make sure who gets the money.
The most important point is they control both parties. And the public continues to only focus in on the distraction of the left puppet and the right puppet instead of looking at the puppet masters. In fact, more and more of this is coming out. Top Senate Democrats, bankers own the U.S. Congress. Senator Dick Durbin on Chicago radio station last week blurted out an obvious truth about Congress. This is from Salon, that despite being blindly obvious, it is rarely spoken. And, quote, the banks, hard to believe in a time when we're facing a banking crisis, that many of the banks created are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill. And frankly, they own the place. So there is one of the most powerful Democrats in the country, top Senate Democrat, saying bankers own the U.S. Congress. It's true. Let's admit it. Let's stop debating the two puppets they put out in front of us, the liberal puppet, the conservative puppet. And then every time we wake up to one of the puppets, they just replace it with another puppet. Let's look past the puppets to the puppet master above them that's controlling the puppets. That's all Aaron Russo and myself and Ron Paul and so many other people are saying. Let's get back to a culture of liberty versus tyranny, not this left-right diversion. You know, when folks are sick of Obama in 4 to 8 years, they're going to put a Republican in, and they'll put out different rhetoric but carry out the same operation. Because as the top Senate Democrats said, the bankers own the place, even though they engineered the crisis. And make no mistake, they did engineer it by design. Their own documents, their own IMF and World Bank documents admit that. And out of this crisis, they're setting up the new Bank of the World, according to Time Magazine and Newsweek and the Wall Street Journal and just hundreds of publications with headlines like, and now for world government in the Financial Times of London. They create the crisis and then say, okay, our Ponzi scheme's falling apart and bankrupting you. Give us $12.8 trillion in the first 6 months of the banker bailout. And now they say, we'll set up a Bank of the World you pay your carbon taxes to, and private bankers will rule your life, and we'll pay private greenhouse gas carbon taxes to two firms owned by Al Gore, and this is publicly admitted. I mean, this is how bad the scamming is getting. And we've got to wake up. We've got to say no. We've got to get angry and get in the face of the New World Order. Again, the private offshore bankers own America. They own both parties, but they get you in a rah-rah, Coke versus Pepsi, Redskins versus Cowboys, fight. And you get in this little political fight as followers instead of looking past that to the actual global elite and what they're setting up.